You've been told your whole life that human civilization is the first real civilization Earth ever produced, the first to build cities, the first to shape metal, the first to burn fuel, the first to leave scars on the planet big enough to be seen from space. But what if that's only true inside the tiny slice of time we call history? What if the truth is far stranger, and the real story of Earth is not a straight line from cavemen to skyscrapers, but a loop, one that's already happened before, and was erased so completely that the world itself forgot it ever existed? Because when you zoom out far enough, when you step back from the last few thousand years and stare into the deep ocean of time, you realize something terrifying. Earth is not just old. Earth is ancient, beyond human imagination. And in that vast age, it becomes possible, disturbingly possible, that an advanced civilization could have risen long before us, thrived in a world we would barely recognize, and then vanished, leaving behind nothing but whispers hidden inside the planet's bones. Picture it, not ancient Egypt, not Rome, not Atlantis, not even dinosaurs. Go further back, so far back that the continents were shaped differently, the skies were different, the oceans were different, and the dominant life on land wasn't even mammals. A world where the concept of human didn't exist yet. A world where the forests didn't sound the same, the storms didn't behave the same, and the stars above looked almost identical, but the creatures below were from another reality. And somewhere in that alien Earth, imagine the impossible. Lights on the horizon, roads cutting through wild landscapes, structures rising where nature once ruled, machines humming in places where, according to every textbook, only silence should exist. It sounds like science fiction, it sounds like a conspiracy, but here's the twist. This idea isn't born from internet rumors. It comes from something much more dangerous. It comes from science itself. Scientists have asked a question that feels illegal to even think about. It's called the Silurian hypothesis, not because it claims there were lizard people or reptilian kings, but because it asks something colder, sharper, and far more unsettling. If an advanced civilization existed millions of years ago, would we even know? Would Earth preserve the evidence, or would time destroy it so completely that even the smartest minds on the planet would miss it? This isn't a fantasy about aliens. This is about us, about what we do to the planet, about the fingerprints we leave behind, about whether those fingerprints would survive long enough for someone else to find them millions of years from now. And once you truly understand the scale of Earth's recycling system, tectonic plates grinding continents like paper in a shredder, oceans swallowing coastlines, mountains turning to dust, you start to realize the horrifying possibility a civilization could disappear so thoroughly that the only proof would be chemical shadows in the rocks, tiny distortions in the planet's memory, like a ghost in the geological record. The terrifying part is that Earth is not a museum. Earth is a machine. It eats its own past. It melts crust into magma. It buries cities under sediments. It drags entire continents beneath oceans. It erases. It resets. The planet doesn't care about monuments or empires or names carved into stone. If you give Earth enough time, it can erase anything, not just most things, anything. And we already know this because the vast majority of life that has ever existed is gone. Entire worlds of ecosystems lived, thrived, and vanished before humans ever took a breath. If Earth can erase the footprints of creatures that ruled for millions of years, what chance does a civilization have, even ours? Right now, you can look at human civilization and think it's permanent. We have satellites, we have the internet, we have nuclear weapons, we have cities that glow at night like constellations on the ground. But imagine Earth without humans. Imagine we vanish tomorrow. No one maintaining roads, no one repairing buildings, no one pumping water, no one protecting power grids. The world would begin swallowing our work immediately. Plants would invade cracks in the pavement within weeks. Animals would return to cities within months. Within years, bridges would collapse. Within decades, skyscrapers would rot and fall. Within thousands of years, most surface evidence would be rubble. Within millions, even the rubble would be gone. The oceans would rise and fall. Ice ages would grind landscapes flat. Rivers would rewrite coastlines. And deep beneath the surface, tectonic forces would bury our ruins under layers of rock, like a sealed tomb. The planet would move on as if we never existed. So now, ask the forbidden question: if that could happen to us, why couldn't it have happened to someone else? And that's where the story begins, not with ancient myths, not with a secret society, but with deep time, the kind of time that makes human history look like a single blink. The Earth is around 4.5 billion years old. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. Civilization, as we recognize it, cities, writing, agriculture, has existed for around 10,000 years. That's not even a fraction. That's not even dust. That's a spark that barely ignited. Which means the planet had billions of years of opportunity before us. Billions of years where evolution could have tried different experiments. Billions of years where intelligence could have emerged in forms we would never recognize. And if a civilization existed 50 million years ago, 100 million years ago, 300 million years ago, it would not just be ancient, it would be beyond ancient. It would be prehistory of prehistory. It would be a civilization swallowed by the planet itself. But there's a problem. If there was a civilization, where are the ruins? Where are the highways? Where are the bones of machines? Where are the skyscrapers turned to stone? We've dug up dinosaur fossils. We've found footprints in mud that hardened into rock. We've discovered ancient meteor impact craters. Surely we would have found something obvious by now, right? Not necessarily. Because fossils are rare miracles, fossilization is not guaranteed. It's an accident of perfect timing and perfect conditions. Most living things die and vanish completely, and civilizations are even more fragile than bones. Cities are made of materials that decay, metals corrode, plastics break down, glass shatters, concrete crumbles, and even if something survives, it has to survive the real monsters: erosion, weathering, oceans, tectonics. Earth is not a gentle archive. Earth is a war against permanence. If a civilization existed long ago, the best chance of finding it would not be a giant statue standing intact. It would be something far more subtle, something that survives even when buildings do not, something that can be preserved inside rock layers and ice cores and ocean sediments, something like chemistry. Because industrial civilizations don't just build, they change the atmosphere, they change the oceans, they change the planet's balance, they burn energy, they release carbon, they create unusual compounds, they leave behind isotopic signatures, chemical fingerprints that could be detectable long after physical structures vanish. Think of it like this: even if every human city disappeared, our era would still leave scars in the planet's chemistry. Plastic particles buried in sediment, a spike in carbon dioxide trapped in ice, unnatural ratios of certain isotopes, traces of radioactive elements, a sudden change in biodiversity, a sharp temperature shift, a mass extinction event. Even if all our monuments are erased, the planet itself would still remember. So the real mystery is not where are the pyramids of the first civilization. The real mystery is whether Earth's geological record contains a strange anomaly, something that looks like the fingerprints of industry, but comes from a time long before humans existed. And here's the part that hits like a punch: the geological record does contain anomalies. Not proof, not a smoking gun, but strange events that, if you squint, resemble what an industrial civilization might cause: sudden warming periods, carbon spikes, ocean acidification events, mass extinction events, layers of sediment showing abrupt shifts in climate. The Earth has gone through multiple episodes where the climate changed rapidly, where ecosystems collapsed, where life was wiped out and replaced by new dominant species. The most famous is the extinction that killed the dinosaurs, but there were others, far older, far more mysterious, and in some cases not fully understood. Some of these events are so dramatic that they look like the Earth was hit by something big, something violent, something that changed everything. Now, before your mind jumps to ancient nukes or lost superweapons, slow down. This story isn't about claiming a hidden civilization definitely existed. This is about exploring the possibility, like a scientific thriller. Because the real power of this idea is not that it gives you an answer, it's that it forces you to ask a question you never dared to ask. And once you ask it, you can't unask it. If Earth can erase civilizations, then our entire view of history becomes fragile. Our arrogance becomes dangerous. Our belief that we are the first, the greatest, the final chapter becomes just a comforting story we tell ourselves. Imagine a civilization millions of years ago, not human, not even mammal, maybe something that evolved from reptiles or from a branch of life that never survived into modern times. It could have been smaller, it could have been different, it could have lived in a world where sea levels were. If that's true, then the most haunting part isn't the existence of the first civilization, it's what happened to it. Because if it rose and fell, then we are not unique. We are repeating a cycle. And if we are repeating a cycle, then the ending might already be written. But what would it take for a civilization to disappear completely? For every city, every machine, every road to be erased? It would take time, yes, but it would also take catastrophe, something that breaks the chain of progress, something that kills the population, collapses the infrastructure, and lets nature reclaim everything. It could be an asteroid. It could be supervolcanoes. It could be runaway climate change. It could be war. It could be a slow collapse where resources run out and technology becomes impossible to maintain. It could be disease. It could be a perfect storm of disasters that pushes civilization past the point of recovery. And if you think that sounds impossible, remember this. Even modern civilization is fragile. We are not a single unified machine. We are a network of systems that depend on constant maintenance. Power grids, supply chains, food distribution, water treatment, medicine production. A disruption in one can ripple into the others. A civilization can collapse not because it loses knowledge, but because it loses stability. And stability is a thin layer of glass over chaos. Now zoom back. Millions of years, tens of millions. A civilization could collapse, its survivors could return to simpler living, and within a few thousand years, the memory of the high-tech age could become myth. Within a few more, it could become silence. Within a million, it could become nothing at all. Not even a story, just chemistry. And that's where the hunt begins. If we wanted to detect a lost industrial civilization, what would we look for? We would look for sudden spikes in greenhouse gases trapped in ancient sediments. We would look for unusual ratios of carbon isotopes, signs that massive amounts of organic carbon were burned quickly. We would look for traces of synthetic compounds that shouldn't exist naturally. We would look for widespread pollution markers. We would look for abrupt changes in ocean chemistry. We would look for extinction patterns that match rapid environmental collapse. We would look for signals that resemble the Anthropocene, the era of humans, but in the deep past. And this is where the story becomes truly cinematic, because the Earth is filled with locked vaults of time. Ice cores are like frozen diaries of ancient atmospheres. Ocean sediments are layered memories. Fossil beds are snapshots of vanished worlds. And every layer of rock is a page in a book that no human wrote, but every human depends on. Somewhere in that book, there could be a chapter that doesn't belong. A chapter that looks like an industrial event long before industry should exist. But the deeper you go, the harder it gets. The geological record is incomplete. Whole pages are missing. Entire eras are erased. And the farther back you look, the more the planet has churned and recycled the evidence. It's like trying to solve a murder mystery where the crime scene has been hit by hurricanes, earthquakes, fires, and floods for 200 million years straight. Still, the idea refuses to die, because we already know Earth has experienced dramatic climate events that look eerily similar to what industrial civilization might cause. Some warming events happened fast, some extinctions were sudden, some carbon shifts were sharp, and even though natural explanations exist, volcanism, methane releases, orbital changes, the fact that these events happened at all means something important. The planet is capable of rapid transformation. The planet can flip states. It can turn from stable to chaotic. And if a civilization existed, it would have lived under the same rules of physics we do. It would have faced the same dangers. It would have been vulnerable to the same planetary forces. Now imagine the final days of that civilization, not as a fantasy, not as a Hollywood explosion, but as a slow realization. The skies changing, the seasons shifting, oceans rising, crops failing, storms intensifying, animals dying, the world becoming unpredictable, leaders making promises, scientists warning, people arguing, society splitting, technology accelerating to solve the problem, while the problem accelerates faster, a civilization racing against its own consequences. And then, at some point, the tipping point is crossed. Systems fail, cities darken, the lights go out, and the world returns to the rule of nature. And millions of years later, humans evolve. We dig into the earth for oil, for coal, for metals. We build our own cities. We burn the same fuels. We change the atmosphere. We warm the planet. We trigger extinctions. And we never realize we might be stepping into footprints left by someone else, footprints that look like nature because time has worn them down into geology. That's the nightmare hiding inside this idea, the possibility that the greatest warning for our future is buried in our planet's past, that the Earth may have already hosted an intelligent species that reached an industrial stage and collapsed, and if that happened once, it can happen again. But before we go deeper, before we hunt for evidence in ancient rock layers, before we explore what kind of civilization could exist without leaving ruins, before we confront the most chilling question of all, we need to understand something fundamental. What exactly counts as proof? What would the fingerprint of a lost civilization look like? And how could it hide in plain sight, disguised as a natural disaster? Because in part 2, we're going to enter the geological crime scene. We're going to examine the planet like detectives. We're going to talk about the strange signals in Earth's past, the climate spikes, the carbon shifts, the extinction events, and the hidden chemical signatures that might be the only surviving echoes of a civilization erased by time. And once you see what scientists would actually search for, you'll realize the scariest truth of all. The Earth doesn't need to remember a civilization for it to have existed. It only needs to leave a shadow. And somewhere in the deep past, the planet might already be haunted. If a civilization existed millions of years before humans, it wouldn't leave behind a clean museum of artifacts waiting for us to discover. It wouldn't be a perfect skyline frozen in stone. It wouldn't be a preserved library, a shining highway, or a single intact monument. Because the Earth is not kind to anything that tries to last. The Earth is a grinder, a recycler, a relentless editor of history. It doesn't preserve, it transforms. And when you begin to understand that, you realize the search for a lost civilization isn't like archaeology. It's closer to forensic science. It's a crime scene investigation where the crime happened so long ago that the room itself has been demolished, rebuilt, and repainted 1,000 times. So if we're going to find anything at all, we have to stop looking for statues and start looking for fingerprints. That's the terrifying beauty of geology. The planet is constantly writing its own diary, layer by layer, in ocean sediments, in ice, in rock formations, in fossil beds. every era leaves behind a signature, and some signatures are loud, like asteroid impacts that scatter iridium across the world. Some are quiet, like subtle shifts in carbon isotopes that only a lab can detect. But all of them tell a story, and the story we're hunting is the strangest one possible, a story where intelligence rose, industrialized, changed the planet, and then vanished so completely that the only evidence is a chemical echo buried under millions of years of stone. So what would an industrial civilization actually leave behind? Not its buildings, not its cars, not its satellites. Those are surface-level artifacts, fragile and temporary. The true signature of an industrial civilization would be global, planetary. It would be written into the atmosphere and oceans, into the carbon cycle, into the chemistry of life itself. It would show up as a sudden disturbance, like a pulse, followed by consequences that ripple across ecosystems. If you wanted to hide an advanced civilization from the future, the best way would be to let the Earth do what it does best, erase the obvious, and preserve only the invisible. The first fingerprint would likely be carbon, because every industrial civilization, no matter what form it takes, needs energy. Energy is the heartbeat of progress. It powers heat, movement, manufacturing, transportation, communication, and if that civilization reached anything like our level, it would almost certainly tap into the easiest stored energy available: carbon-based fuels. Oil, coal, natural gas, the remains of ancient life compressed into power. Burn it and you release carbon dioxide, lots of it, quickly. And when carbon dioxide rises fast enough, the climate reacts. Oceans warm, ice melts, weather patterns shift, the biosphere trembles. Life either adapts or collapses. Now, imagine this happening millions of years ago, not just a small local shift, but a global carbon spike that appears suddenly in the geological record. That spike wouldn't scream civilization, because nature can create carbon spikes too. Volcanoes can flood the atmosphere with greenhouse gases. Methane hydrates can destabilize and explode into the air. Massive wildfires can release carbon stored in forests. The planet has its own ways of burning, but the key isn't just that carbon rises. The key is how it rises, how fast, how sharp, how it changes the ratios of carbon isotopes in the rock layers, because carbon comes in different forms, different weights, different flavors, and burning huge amounts of organic carbon leaves a distinct isotopic signature, like a chemical accent that reveals what kind of carbon was released. If an industrial civilization burned fossil fuels, it would likely create a recognizable shift in the carbon isotope record, a global disturbance, a sudden warming, a cascade of biological stress, the same kind of pattern we are creating right now. And that means the question isn't, could Earth show signs of this? The question is, has Earth ever shown signs of something like this before? And the answer is uncomfortable. Yes. Earth's past contains multiple episodes of rapid warming and carbon disruption, events where the climate changed quickly enough to shock ecosystems. One of the most famous is a deep-time climate event where temperatures spiked dramatically and the planet became hotter and more chaotic in a relatively short geological moment. Scientists have strong natural explanations for these events, but the fact that such extreme disruptions exist at all makes the Silurian-style question legitimate, because if you were trying to detect an industrial civilization, you would be looking for something like that: a carbon pulse, a warming spike, a biosphere response. But carbon isn't the only fingerprint. The second fingerprint would be extinction. Not necessarily total annihilation, but a sharp change in biodiversity, a sudden collapse of certain species, a shift in ecosystems. Because when the planet's climate changes rapidly, life pays the price. And industrial civilization doesn't just warm the planet, it fragments habitats, poisons waterways, disrupts food chains, pushes species to the edge. If an ancient civilization industrialized, even briefly, it might trigger an extinction pulse, not as dramatic as an asteroid, but enough to leave a scar. And here's where the story becomes chilling, because extinction events are not rare in Earth's history. The planet has endured multiple mass extinctions, moments where life was almost wiped clean and forced to restart. But not every extinction event is fully understood. Not every shift has a single obvious cause. Some are combinations of disasters: volcanism plus climate change, plus ocean anoxia, plus acidification. And in that complexity, the idea of a lost civilization hides like a shadow in fog, not proven, not confirmed, but hauntingly possible. The third fingerprint is ocean chemistry, because oceans are Earth's lungs and bloodstream. They absorb carbon, they regulate temperature, they feed plankton, which feeds everything else. If you disturb the atmosphere, the oceans respond. They warm, they expand, they become more acidic. Oxygen levels drop in certain regions, dead zones spread, entire marine ecosystems can collapse, and the ocean is also one of the best places to preserve ancient evidence because sediments accumulate steadily on the sea floor like pages in a book. A lost civilization could vanish from the land, but its pollution might still be buried in deep-sea mud. And that leads to one of the most haunting ideas of all. What if the ruins of an ancient civilization are not on land at all? What if they're underwater, crushed under layers of sediment, hidden beneath oceans that have risen and fallen many times? Coastlines are where civilizations love to grow. Humans build near water. We build ports, trade routes, cities. If another civilization did the same, and then sea levels changed over millions of years, those coastal centers could be gone, not destroyed in an explosion, but buried and sealed. And today, they would be far beyond our reach, resting under kilometers of ocean and rock. Now, let's get even darker, because the fourth fingerprint might be something we've never truly considered: synthetic compounds, plastics, industrial chemicals, molecules that nature doesn't easily produce. Right now, we are filling the planet with synthetic materials, microplastics drifting through oceans, entering animals, settling into sediments. If humanity disappeared, plastics might degrade, but some traces could persist as chemical residues. Some polymers could survive long enough to become part of sediment layers. And if a civilization existed in the deep past and created its own synthetic chemistry, it might have left behind unusual compounds, strange molecules trapped in rock like insects in amber. The problem is, millions of years is a long time for chemistry. Many compounds would break down, many would be consumed by microbes, oxidized, transformed. But the idea remains: a civilization's chemical legacy might outlive its physical legacy. Even if the machines are gone, the contamination could remain, diluted but detectable. The fifth fingerprint is radioactive signatures. Nuclear technology is one of the few things that can leave long-lasting isotopic markers. Certain isotopes persist for hundreds of thousands or millions of years. If an ancient civilization reached nuclear power or nuclear war, it could leave behind unusual ratios of radioactive elements. But here's the twist: even this isn't simple, because nature produces radioactive anomalies too. Uranium deposits exist naturally, cosmic rays create isotopes, the Earth itself is radioactive, so again, the evidence would have to be global and unnatural in pattern, not just a local deposit, but a worldwide signature. And that's what makes this entire hunt so brutal. Every fingerprint a civilization might leave behind has a natural explanation. Carbon spikes can be volcanoes, extinctions can be asteroids, ocean chemistry shifts can be climate cycles, radioactivity can be geology. So the question becomes not is there a sign, but is there a combination of signs that looks too much like industry to ignore? And when you look at Earth's history, you find windows of chaos, moments where the planet's systems changed abruptly, moments where carbon shifted and temperatures spiked and ecosystems collapsed. Again, scientists have strong natural explanations, but the pattern itself is what matters. It shows that Earth is capable of rapid transformation.
Now imagine the psychological horror of this. What if an ancient civilization reached the same crossroads we're approaching now? What if it discovered the power of stored carbon and burned it, believing it was unlocking progress, only to realize too late that it was unlocking a climate trap? What if it watched the seas rise and the storms grow violent? What if it saw ecosystems collapse and food systems fail? What if it tried to adapt, building barriers, changing technology, moving inland, fighting over resources? And what if it lost? What if it collapsed, not because it lacked intelligence, but because it underestimated the planet? Because here's the truth: intelligence does not guarantee survival. Intelligence can build skyscrapers. Intelligence can split atoms. Intelligence can map the genome. But intelligence can also create problems too large to solve in time. And the deeper you go into this thought experiment, the more it stops being about some mysterious lost species and starts being about us, about whether we are the first civilization or just the latest one. Now, you might be thinking, if a civilization existed, wouldn't it have left behind at least one obvious artifact? Something undeniable, something that would make headlines? A machine fossil? A metallic structure? A strange object embedded in rock? The problem is that even metal doesn't last forever. Iron rusts, aluminum oxidizes, copper corrodes. Given enough time, most metals dissolve into the environment, and even if some objects survived, they would be scattered, rare, buried deep, and likely destroyed by tectonic recycling. Earth's crust is not a static shelf. It moves, it subducts, it melts, it erases. In fact, most of Earth's surface older than a certain age is gone. Ocean crust is constantly being created and destroyed. Continents are reshaped. Mountains rise and fall. The farther back you go, the less intact the surface record becomes, which means the older the civilization, the less likely it is to leave obvious remains. The planet becomes an enemy of proof. But there is one place where the record can be strangely stable: deep sediments, the quiet accumulation at the bottom of oceans, the slow layering in certain basins, the trapped atmospheres in ice, the mineral signatures in rocks. That's where the planet hides its secrets, and that's why the Silurian-style question is so fascinating. It turns Earth into a mystery novel. The detective isn't an archaeologist with a brush. The detective is a scientist with a spectrometer, reading chemical clues written in stone. Now, let's imagine what the timeline could look like. A civilization emerges, maybe from an intelligent species that evolved in an era we barely understand. It grows, it spreads, it industrializes, it changes the planet. Then something happens, either a sudden catastrophe or a slow unraveling. The civilization collapses, the survivors fade into extinction or return to simpler life. Over time, nature reclaims everything. Forests grow over ruins, rivers bury roads, oceans swallow coastlines. The world resets. The chemical fingerprints remain, but they become part of the planet's background noise, disguised as a natural event. Millions of years pass, new species evolve, new ecosystems rise. Eventually, humans appear. We build our own civilization. We burn carbon. We change the climate. And without realizing it, we might be recreating the same pattern that ended the last one. And here's the moment where this story stops being just a thought experiment and becomes a warning. Because even if no ancient civilization ever existed, the fact that the planet can erase civilizations means our future is not guaranteed. The fact that the planet's record contains sudden climate disruptions means stability is not permanent. The fact that we are creating our own geological signature right now means we are writing a chapter into Earth's diary that will outlast every nation, every language, every monument we have ever built.
And one day, far in the future, if another intelligence rises, whether it's a new species on Earth or something else entirely, it may dig into the rock and find our fingerprint. Not our cities, not our flags, not our names, just a carbon spike, a temperature shift, a plastic residue, a radioactive whisper. And it will ask the same question we are asking now: who was here before us? But we still haven't reached the most disturbing part of this entire mystery, because the biggest question isn't whether a civilization could be erased. The biggest question is whether the conditions for intelligence could have existed in deep time at all. Could evolution produce a technological species before humans? Could the world support it? Could it build an industrial society without leaving obvious fossils? Could it rise in an era when dinosaurs ruled, or even earlier? And if so, what would it look like? In Part 3, we're going to cross the final threshold. We're going to explore what kind of life could have become intelligent before humans, what kind of civilization could exist in a world with different continents and climates, and the terrifying implications if the planet has already hosted and erased an advanced species. And when we reach the end, you'll understand why this isn't just a mystery about the past, it's a prophecy about the future. Because if Earth has done this before, it can do it again. To truly understand how terrifying this question is, you have to stop imagining a lost civilization as ancient humans, because that's the trap our brains fall into. We see the word civilization and instantly picture people who look like us: faces, hands, cities, languages, wars, flags. But if a civilization existed millions of years before humans, it almost certainly wouldn't be human. It wouldn't speak our languages. It wouldn't share our myths. It might not even share our biology. It would be something shaped by a different world, a different climate, a different evolutionary history. And that's the first reason we might never recognize it. Because the most dangerous mysteries aren't the ones hidden behind locked doors. They're the ones hidden in plain sight, disguised as something we don't know how to interpret. So the question becomes even more intense. Could evolution really produce intelligence before us? Could a species rise to the point of technology, industry, and global impact long before humans existed? The uncomfortable answer is yes, at least in theory. Evolution isn't a straight line toward humans. It's a chaotic experiment running billions of times across deep time. The fact that humans became intelligent doesn't prove we were destined. It only proves it happened once. And in a planet as old as Earth, once might not be the full story. Intelligence could be rare, but rare doesn't mean impossible. Rare means you might have to wait millions of years for it to appear, and Earth has had time. Think about the ingredients needed for a technological civilization. You need a brain capable of complex reasoning. You need a body that can manipulate the environment: hands, claws, tentacles, something that can build and craft. You need social structures, communication, learning, culture. You need access to energy. You need materials. And most importantly, you need a window of stability long enough for progress to accumulate. Humans had that window, and even then, it took us hundreds of thousands of years to go from stone tools to spaceflight. That means an ancient civilization would need the same: time and stability. But Earth has had long stretches of stability, eras where life flourished for tens of millions of years, entire ages where ecosystems dominated and evolved without interruption. And that's where the idea becomes chilling. Because if evolution can produce intelligence and Earth can provide stability, then the only thing stopping an ancient civilization from existing is probability. And probability, given enough time, starts to bend. Now imagine a world millions of years ago. The continents are different, the coastlines are unfamiliar, the climate might be warmer, the oceans higher. The air composition could vary slightly. The dominant animals might be reptiles or massive insects or early mammals. And somewhere in that world, a species evolves that can think, plan, build, and remember. It begins as a predator or scavenger. It learns patterns. It forms groups. It communicates. It manipulates objects. It starts using tools. And then the leap happens, the leap that changed our world, the leap from surviving to controlling. At first, it's simple. Stones shaped for cutting, shelters built against storms, fire controlled for warmth and cooking. Then the next stage, agriculture, domestication, cities, trade, politics. Then the stage that truly transforms the planet, industry. The discovery that the Earth itself contains power, that ancient life, buried and compressed, can be burned to move machines. And when that happens, the civilization begins to rewrite the planet's chemistry. It becomes a geological force. But here's the brutal truth. Industrial civilization is not a victory. It's a gamble, because the same power that lifts a species into technological dominance also gives it the ability to destabilize its own world. The more energy it consumes, the more it disrupts the systems that keep it alive. And that's why this mystery is so haunting, because it suggests that advanced civilizations may not fail because they are weak, but because the planet has limits, and the price of progress is higher than intelligence expects. Now, you might ask, why wouldn't we find fossils of this species? Why wouldn't we see skeletons in the rock record that scream intelligence? The answer is as cold as it is simple. Fossils are rare, and the fossil record is incomplete. The Earth does not preserve everything. It preserves fragments, snapshots, broken pieces of a story that once existed in full. Entire species vanish without a single fossil left behind. Entire ecosystems disappear with no trace. So it's possible, again, not proven, but possible, that a technological species could exist and leave behind little to no obvious skeletal record. And even if fossils existed, would we recognize them as intelligent? Intelligence doesn't fossilize. A brain turns to mush, culture turns to dust, language disappears. What remains is bone, and bone can't tell you whether a creature wrote poetry, built machines, or mapped the stars. If you found a skeleton, you might label it as just another extinct animal. You might never realize you were looking at the remains of something that once stood at the top of its world. But the bigger question is this: could a civilization really become advanced without leaving massive physical evidence? And this is where the Earth's cruelty becomes the final answer. Over millions of years, continents shift, mountains rise, rivers carve new paths, oceans swallow land, ice ages grind cities into nothing. Tectonic plates drag crust into the mantle, like a conveyor belt into a furnace. Even if an ancient civilization built megastructures, the planet could erase them. And if most of its population lived along coastlines, like humans do, then sea level changes alone could bury the greatest centers of that world under sediment and water, hiding them from discovery forever. So the hunt returns to the only evidence that truly lasts, the planet's chemical memory. If an ancient civilization existed, its most durable legacy would not be ruins but climate, not statues but isotopes, not roads but extinctions. And that means the question becomes almost philosophical. If a civilization lived, changed the world, and vanished so completely that no one can prove it ever existed, did it matter? Did it still count? The answer is yes, because existence doesn't require witnesses. The planet itself is the witness. Even if we can't read every detail, the Earth remembers in patterns. And now we reach the most disturbing twist of all. Because when you study the idea of a forgotten civilization, you start realizing the story isn't really about the past, it's about the future. It's about what happens to any civilization that reaches industrial power on a living planet. The moment a species becomes advanced enough to change the atmosphere, it enters a dangerous phase, a phase where it can accidentally destabilize the climate that made it possible, a phase where it becomes powerful enough to destroy itself. And that's why this mystery is so haunting, because it suggests that advanced civilizations may not fail because they are weak, but because the planet has limits, and the price of progress is higher than intelligence expects. Now, you might ask, why wouldn't we find fossils of this species? Why wouldn't we see skeletons in the rock record that scream intelligence? The answer is as cold as it is simple. Fossils are rare, and the fossil record is incomplete. The Earth does not preserve everything. It preserves fragments, snapshots, broken pieces of a story that once existed in full. Entire species vanish without a single fossil left behind. Entire ecosystems disappear with no trace. So it's possible, again, not proven, but possible, that a technological species could exist and leave behind little to no obvious skeletal record. And even if fossils existed, would we recognize them as intelligent? Intelligence doesn't fossilize. A brain turns to mush, culture turns to dust, language disappears. What remains is bone, and bone can't tell you whether a creature wrote poetry, built machines, or mapped the stars. If you found a skeleton, you might label it as just another extinct animal. You might never realize you were looking at the remains of something that once stood at the top of its world. But the bigger question is this: could a civilization really become advanced without leaving massive physical evidence? And this is where the Earth's cruelty becomes the final answer. Over millions of years, continents shift, mountains rise, rivers carve new paths, oceans swallow land, ice ages grind cities into nothing. Tectonic plates drag crust into the mantle like a conveyor belt into a furnace. Even if an ancient civilization built megastructures, the planet could erase them. And if most of its population lived along coastlines, like humans do, then sea level changes alone could bury the greatest centers of that world under sediment and water, hiding them from discovery forever. So the hunt returns to the only evidence that truly lasts, the planet's chemical memory. If an ancient civilization existed, its most Now imagine another intelligence evolving tens of millions of years from now. A new species, a new mind, a new civilization. It rises on the same planet, unaware of us. It builds its own cities, its own machines. And one day, its scientists drill into ancient rock layers and discover a strange anomaly. A sudden carbon shift, a rapid warming, a mass extinction, synthetic molecules, a radioactive whisper, and they ask the same question we are asking now. Did someone exist before us? They will not find our skyscrapers. They will not find our flags. They will not find our names. They will find a scar, and they will try to interpret it. Some will say it was natural. Some will say it was a civilization. Some will argue for centuries, and the truth may remain uncertain forever, because time doesn't just erase evidence, time erases certainty. That's why this entire concept feels like a horror story disguised as science, because the scariest part isn't the possibility of an ancient civilization. The scariest part is realizing how easily we could become one, not in the sense of being ancient and legendary, but in the sense of being forgotten, erased, reduced to a chemical event in the rocks. Now, let's take it one step further, because this is where HMD Origins becomes more than entertainment. This becomes a warning. If a civilization existed before us and collapsed, it means intelligence is not the final achievement. It means intelligence is a phase, not a guarantee. It means the real test is not whether you can build machines, but whether you can survive the consequences of building them. And that changes everything about how we see our future. because maybe the real reason we don't see evidence of ancient civilizations isn't because they never existed, but because civilizations don't last long enough to leave obvious traces. Maybe industrial civilizations burn bright and die fast. Maybe they rise, reshape the planet, trigger instability, and collapse before they can become truly permanent. And if that's true, then the silence of the universe, the lack of obvious ancient footprints, the emptiness we see when we look into deep time, might not be an accident. It might be the rule. A rule written by physics, by geology, by the limits of a living world. But there's another possibility, a more hopeful one. What if a civilization could survive? What if the trap isn't inevitable? What if the reason we don't see ancient ruins is because the successful civilizations learned to disappear, learned to live without scarring the planet, learned to use energy without poisoning the air, learned to build without triggering collapse? In that case, the most advanced civilization wouldn't look like a world of steel and smoke. It would look like nature. It would blend in. It would leave almost no trace. And if that's the truth, then the ultimate form of intelligence is not domination, it's harmony. And suddenly, the question shifts. It's no longer just, were we the first? It becomes, what kind of civilization are we becoming? Are we the type that burns fast and collapses, or the type that learns before it's too late? Because the real horror is that we may never know if Earth hosted a civilization before humans. The evidence might be too faint, too deep, too erased. We may search forever and find only ambiguous signals, patterns that could be natural or could be something else. But the lesson remains. Whether the lost civilization was real or not, the Earth is capable of wiping the slate clean. The Earth is capable of erasing empires, and the Earth does not care how advanced you are. The planet doesn't negotiate, it doesn't forgive, it just continues. And that means our future is not secured by our technology, it's secured by our choices. Because if we keep writing the same story, burning ancient carbon, destabilizing the climate, pushing ecosystems toward collapse, then we might be creating the exact kind of geological signature that makes future scientists wonder if we were here at all. We might be writing our own disappearance into the rocks. So the final question isn't what if humans weren't the first civilization? The final question is far more personal, far more urgent, and far more terrifying. What if we're not the last? What if our civilization becomes just another hidden chapter in Earth's forgotten history, an anomaly in the stone, a carbon scar, a whisper of industry buried under oceans and time? And if that happens, then millions of years from now, the planet will still spin, forests will grow, new creatures will evolve, new minds will rise, and they will stand on a world that once belonged to us, looking at the same stars, asking the same question, chasing the same mystery. And they will never know our names, only our shadow, only the evidence that we existed, only the warning we left behind without even realizing it. Because Earth doesn't preserve civilizations, Earth tests them. And the greatest mystery of all might not be whether someone came before us, but whether we can survive long enough to not become the next lost civilization.